Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my kitchen, where today we're going to be doing a Sea of Thieves bake. So one of the first things we're going to have to do is consider what kind of cake we're going to bake for this. I was thinking of doing a 2-layer cake with chocolate and peppermint frosting. Now, the difficulty with that is going to be that if I overdo the mint in the peppermint frosting, it's going to taste like I've just smeared the cake in toothpaste. But the combination of chocolate and mint goes together quite well. We know this because we have mint choc chip ice cream. Excellent. The next thing we have to consider is the actual look of the cake. Sea of Thieves have like barrelfuls of pictures and logos and stock images that we could use, and I looked through a lot of them on the internet, and I decided to make one based on the original sort of green skull image that came up with, that gets used on the front of their game boxes as well, because I really like that sort of the empty space design showing another image. And I think it's going to be a good challenge to try and get that brilliant green texture, because it's not just green. It's like this combination. It's almost this weird marbling effect, where it gets brighter in areas and then deeper green in others. And it means that I'll have to actually colour the fondant icing myself, because if you've ever bought green fondant icing from Tesco's, yeah, the less said about that, the better. The black icing, however, I will be buying off the shelf, because the way that I make the green icing, as you will see, means that it's really impractical for making good black icing, because it just doesn't work. Believe me, I've tried. For the cake, you will need 200 milliliters of vegetable oil, 250 grams of plain flour, 6 tablespoons of cocoa powder, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda, 280 grams of soft brown sugar, 250 milliliters of buttermilk, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and of course, 3 large eggs. As with any cake, I start by taking the base of one of my 2 baking tins and tracing out a line around the edge so that I can properly line with baking paper. I then used the spare baking paper to grease the tins with butter. Strictly speaking, you can use oil to also grease the tins, however I prefer to use butter, as in my experience it's just slightly better out of the 2 options. The next thing you need to do is to turn the oven on to 180 degrees. Forgive the camera here, it was having a funny 5. Next you'll take the flour, sugar, bicarbonate of soda, cocoa powder, baking powder, and combine them all within one bowl. I would recommend that you sieve the plain flour in to give it air and therefore make the cake nice and light. With the sugar, I had a slight problem sieving it through, as there were some harder clumps of sugar within the sieve. However, considering the mixing technique we're about to use, there isn't much problem with just tipping it all in. You then combine everything just by running it through your hands until it turns to this nice fine sandy mixture. Next up, you want to take your oil and your buttermilk and whisk them together within either a jug or, as I've done here, a Pyrex bowl. Whisk until properly combined. And then add your vanilla extract and your 3 large eggs. Now, I only had medium eggs available to me, so I compensated by adding a 4th egg. If you have a small egg, then you'll need 6. Whisk until properly combined. Add your wet ingredients to your dry ingredients, and then, using a wooden spoon or similar, fold into one another until the mixture takes on a very dark, rich brown colour and a good cake texture, as you can see here. There should be no streaks of flour left when you stir. Next, divide evenly between the tins the cake mixture. I tend to eyeball this. It does mean that one of my cakes usually comes out slightly larger than the other, but I tend to use that to define which cake is the base and which cake goes on top. Put the cakes in the oven and then leave for 20 minutes. So I wanted to shoot some B-roll footage because the chances are I'm likely to need it. So I thought I would discuss Sea of Thieves and my favourite moments in it and why I keep going back to the game. And yeah, I thought about it for about the last 10-15 minutes while I was making the cake, and I just couldn't really put my finger on a particular favourite memory, because as corny as this sounds, they kind of all are. You can never play the same game on Sea of Thieves twice. You know, there's always going to be a different aspect to it. You run into different crews. You know, some of them are friendly, some of them are not. Sometimes you get sunk, sometimes you do the sinking. Recently, in the last stream I did, we came across a galleon crew that was crewed by people who'd never played the game before, and after we realised that, we decided rather than sinking them, we'd actually try and help them out. And that to me is what makes it a great game, is that you can keep going back and doing it, and especially considering that we've been doing this every Wednesday for the past couple of years. For me and my friends, it's a way of keeping in touch, especially over the last year where we've all been in lockdown in the UK. And I just think that the game itself has come on leaps and bounds from where I first entered. And I first entered the game in I believe it was the Cursed Sails event when the skeleton fleets first started. And yeah, I've not been bored of the game. I've had moments where the game is frustrating, but that's any game. Any game you play, anything you do, you can get frustrated with it. Anyway, point being is that, I need B-roll footage. And just because something's frustrating doesn't make it a bad thing. Once the 20 minutes are up, take the cakes out of the oven and use a skewer inserted into the centre of the cake to see if it's baked properly. The skewer should come out clean, like this. If you still see a lot of cake mix on it, put the cake back in for another 5 minutes or so. Once the cakes have been removed and are properly cooked, put them on a cooling rack to cool off while you prepare the fondant and the buttercream icing. For the buttercream icing, you will need 300 grams of butter, 600 grams of icing sugar, green food colouring, two and a half teaspoons of peppermint extract, and 8 tablespoons of milk. I should point out that I'm using double the ingredients to make double the amount. If you're just icing this middle, then you just need half of that. To start with, I cube the butter and place it into the bowl for whisking. Now, a good tip here is to leave the butter out so that it reaches room temperature, because then it's much easier to whisk. You should whisk the butter until it becomes soft and malleable. Then you will add your icing sugar. This might take some time. As we see here, I make the mistake of turning the whisk on before I've added the milk, and what happens is half of the icing sugar just explodes out of the bowl. It's always a good idea, once you add the icing sugar, add some of the milk as well, as it will prevent the icing sugar from just flying up in the air as soon as you start the whisk. Add the food colouring partway through the process. More milk can be added if the icing sugar starts to turn out too dry or lumpy. Remember, we're looking for a nice smooth creamy texture. Add the peppermint. Cover with cling film and put to one side. Now, if you want, you can level your cakes out so that you've got a flat surface to apply the buttercream frosting. As we can see, one cake rose higher than the other, so after making adjustments using my cake saw, I decide to use the thicker cake as the base. Take your buttercream icing, spoon onto the top, and then spread evenly. You can make this as thick or as thin as you like. The reason I made double the amount I normally make is because I want to put frosting all over the outside of the cake as well, and use that to keep the fondant icing attached. For the fondant you will need icing sugar, fondant icing, and food colouring. To start with, take the fondant icing and knead it until it is soft and malleable. This is required because otherwise you're going to be rolling out a brick and that's not going to be good. Add the food colouring, but not to the amount I did. I sort of got overzealous with it and it ended up all over the side, and I actually had to clean the side down partway through. It is a good idea to put some icing sugar down because it allows, like flour on dough for bread, it prevents the fondant from drying out. As you see here, I went to wash my hands and then I had to scrub the side down and get rid of all of the black food colouring that had spilt onto the side and started to become very sticky. I put more icing sugar down so that the fondant doesn't stick to the side, and I continue to knead until the colour is fully blended in to the fondant icing, which started off as white and will end up, unfortunately, very stone grey. But it will take a very long time and an incredible amount of food colouring, which I don't have, to turn it black like I wanted to originally. Before we put the fondant onto the cake, we have to cover the rest of the cake in the peppermint frosting. I start at the top and then I just work my way down the sides, making sure there's an even coating. I'd like to point out I'm not a professional, and while this does end up quite messy, I am relatively pleased with the result. Now, put some icing sugar over your rolling pin and roll out the fondant icing until it's large enough to cover the cake and go down the sides. However, try to take care not to roll the rolling pin over the edge of your fondant icing, as this will flatten the edge and make it uneven. Once you have applied the fondant icing to the cake, smooth down by using the back of your hand or a spoon. Start at the top and smooth it out, and then slowly make your way down the sides. This will prevent it from wrinkling or creasing as you push it down, because the fondant icing will stretch. Take a sharp knife and take out any excess. For the fondant decoration, I pre-cut out a logo, and I spent about 15 minutes in the living room with a pair of scissors making sure that it was cut out properly. I use a small amount of fondant icing this time. I only need one hand to knead it rather than having to throw it at the kitchen side like I was previously. Once it's soft and malleable, I add the green food colouring. And fold it and knead until the colour bleeds through all of the fondant icing. So I rolled the fondant icing out till it was large enough to take the template. Then I used the template and a sharp knife and a lot of time to cut out the shape desired. Now, the problem with the technique I'm using here is the fondant had reached a stage where it was very malleable and very sticky, and so trying to make accurate shapes in it was actually incredibly difficult, which is why the end result is more of a cartoony skull than the Sea of Thieves logo. So in future, if I do fondant designs like this, I'm going to review how you would make accurate shapes, whether you'd need to leave the fondant to rest or maybe use a different tool to cut them out. It also would have been more sensible to do this inversely, because that way I wouldn't have had to pick up the fondant and flip it over to put the buttercream icing on, which risks damaging the shape that I'd cut out. Before placing on the cake, put fondant icing on the back of the fondant decoration. This allows it to stick to the cake properly and not just fall off. I do the same with the second part of the template, which is much easier to cut out because there's less on it.
And here we have the finished product. It's not as detailed as I'd like, and it's a lot messier than I'd have hoped for, but considering it's the first attempt I've had at making a detailed picture out of marzipan, or, well, fondant, I'm actually quite happy with it. And I've had a quick test of the mint and of the chocolate cake combined, and it actually works really well, so I am really hoping that the people I'm making this for enjoy the cake. Anyway, if Rare is watching this, or anyone at Rare is watching this, or anyone who plays Sea of Thieves is watching this, congratulations on 3 years of an excellent game. Well done on earning that Bafta. Winning the Bafta, earning the Bafta, came out as whirning. Well done on whirning the Bafta. And I hope for many more years of nautical nonsense. So I have been your host, ladies and gentlemen, and I shall see you in my kitchen next time for another bake.